When we think about limiting saturated fat, how would you summarize what we've learned in terms of what the best replacements are in order of highest impact to lowest impact and what that looks like for someone's diet?
Right. Actually, thank you, because that really is at the center of a lot of misunderstanding and controversy here. And basically, if you're to compare saturated fat to something really bad, trans fat actually looks worse. Or you could say that saturated fat's better gram for gram compared to trans fat. And the best is basically replacing saturated fat with liquid plant oils and some mix of polyunsaturates and monounsaturates like olive oil or canola oil or soybean oil. And so that's where you get the sort of you might say, double win of reducing the saturated fat, and the positive win, more essential fatty acids that have cholesterol lowering effects and some other beneficial effects as well. And there's been confusion, especially if you compare saturated fat to carbohydrate. Overall, it looks like it's about an even draw, and probably a little bit worse if you replace saturated fat with refined starch or potatoes, which behave metabolically pretty similarly to refined starch. But if you compare saturated fat to whole grains, intact wheat berries, whole grains, intact whole grains, then the gram for gram, the whole grains probably do a little bit better than the saturated fats. In fact, almost the whole story is, what is the comparison?
So seed oils are healthy?
Yes, right. But at least within the range that Americans are consuming them. And you can probably consume too much, but we don't see evidence of people doing that here in our population. If you look all over the internet, and that's what the recommendations, it looks like, are going to be, RFK said avoid seed oils, that the belief is that they're pro-inflammatory. And there's really no evidence for that. And there's a massive body of evidence saying that seed oils are not pro-inflammatory. There are many studies done, randomized studies, looking at different levels of seed oil consumption, and really none of them. There are, I think, about 20 now randomized trials showing no increase in inflammatory factors in the blood, and about roughly half of the studies show decrease in inflammatory factors. And there have been lots of observational studies, non-randomized studies, showing the same thing. Now, where did this myth come from? And that's a good question that I'm still not totally sure. One source was a Greek nutritionist, Artemis Simopoulos, who, to her credit, I think, pointed out, more importantly than others had, that omega-3 fatty acids are beneficial. And that had been overlooked by a number of people. And, of course, we've always known for many decades that omega-3 fatty acids are essential, but not so much attention paid to their health benefits. But then she sort of took a leap of faith, because there was no evidence in her own data or anybody's data to support it, that because omega-3 fatty acids beneficial, then omega-6 fatty acids have to be harmful. In principle, there is a metabolic pathway where you could imagine some competition, but when you actually look at the data, that competition is pretty minimal. And what we see is the lowest inflammatory factors are when we have adequate amounts of both omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Just because one is good doesn't mean the other one's bad.
I think there's also, in addition to the omega-6 pathway being pro-inflammatory, which I agree with you is a kind of commonly held belief out there, despite the evidence, I think there is also another commonly held view, is that these plant oils are unstable under heat, and if you were to cook with them versus, say, butter or ghee, they're going to oxidize, and then that is going to cause inflammation, which goes back to the earlier claim that you kind of spoke to.
Yes. Well, first of all, the fatty acids that are most sensitive to heat are, in fact, the omega-3 fatty acids, not the omega-6 fatty acids. So you should be most concerned about that if you're using fats for cooking. But it is true that you can sort of abuse saturated fat more in cooking processes than polyunsaturated fats. And we do want to be careful and treat our essential fatty acids, the omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, treat them carefully, because we can damage them. And the biggest abuse was, of course, partially hydrogenating them and turning them into trans fat, which, interestingly enough, also happens in the rumens of cattle. And so you do get some trans fat, not huge amounts, but modest amounts of trans fat from dairy fat and from beef fat as well. But do have to be careful of that. We have looked at the fatty acid profile in detail, frying something in the home with corn oil, and looked at it before and after the frying was done. And we really couldn't see any difference there. Now, commercial deep frying, do have to be careful about that. In some commercial operations, they leave the fat at high temperature in the fryer for 4 or 5 days before it's changed. And that could be worrisome, that kind of cooking. Also, I've talked to my Chinese colleagues, and the way stir frying is often done is you really bring it to smoking before you put the food in, the oil to smoking. And that does need to be looked at a little more carefully there. So I don't totally dismiss that concern, but for home use, the way we generally use it, we don't see a problem with using unsaturated, healthy fats.
Do you tend to cook with olive oil, given that's part of a Mediterranean style diet, or do you cook with other oils at home?
Yeah, we pretty much use olive oil as the go-to fat for on the table or cooking. But there is a reality. We can't say everybody should use just olive oil, because if you look at the actual production, it's really a pretty small, modest fraction of the global fat supply. So I think in practical reality, we have to use a variety of different fats. If oil industry, they were using trans fat because those are also really very stable. And they've switched in the commercial cooking oil industry to fats that are lower in polyunsaturated fat, especially omega-3 fatty acids. And that's something I think we do need to keep an eye on, because we could end up with omega-3 fatty acid intakes that are too low if the commercial world switches to either genetically modified or naturally selected strains of canola oil, soybean oil that are very low in omega-3 fatty acids. We do want to get those omega-3 fatty acids from someplace, and that's been an important source. Of course, they were not there in the trans fat days. They were just pretty much gone when people were cooking with trans fat.
What matters more here? Is it the saturated fat to polyunsaturated fat ratio in someone's diet? Or is it the absolute amount of saturated fats and polyunsaturated fats? Because they could look very differently in, you described earlier, some of your colleagues enjoy a low carb, high fat diet, and then others enjoy a high carb, kind of lower relative fat diet. And you may have the same ratio of saturated to polyunsaturated fat in both those diets, but the absolute amount of saturated fat and polyunsaturated fat differs a lot.
That's a good question. And it really is, what's most important is we get adequate absolute amounts of the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So we do use the ratio. It's convenient, but ultimately you could have a good ratio, but really be at low fat intakes, but be deficient in the essential fatty acids. So I think just because it is convenient, a good way of describing a food in particular, that ratio is helpful and been around for decades and decades. But in the end, in an overall diet, we have to make sure that we get adequate amounts of omega-3 and omega-6. In particular, that ratio can be misleading. There are some advocates that ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is a critical factor. There, that ratio really doesn't work, because you could be easily deficient in both of them and have a perfect ratio.
And when it comes to saturated fat itself, what's your view on the general kind of guidelines for someone who doesn't have cardiovascular disease to try and get less than 10% of their daily calories from saturated fat? Someone with cardiovascular disease, perhaps that's 6% of calories or less. Do you have a view on that?
I don't bother to try to figure out exactly what percent of calories I consume are from saturated fat. I really do think more about the foods that I'm eating. And I think that's what people can understand. It's really hard for someone to know what percent of calories you're getting from saturated fat, or even the calories in your diet. So it really is, I think, among the various choices that we have when we're planning our meals or going out, to emphasize plant sources of protein, because they will come with healthy fats, and the beef and dairy come with quite a bit of saturated fat, but even more importantly, and we don't talk about it as much, but they're very low in essential fatty acids, and especially omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. So I think what's really useful to people is not trying to meet any percent of energy requirement, but which foods we emphasize.
Every new year, we talk about diets, workouts, habits. But the more I learn about health, the more I believe the best place to start is with a clear picture of what's happening inside your body. Consider it like a car service, but for your body. a routine check-in that helps you understand what's running well and what might need a little attention. That's why I use Function. Function gives you access to over 100 biomarkers each year. Things like hormones, inflammation, metabolic health, nutrients, and even environmental toxins. These are tests offered through Function, and they provide a far deeper understanding of your health than the average annual physical. When I got my first full panel back, some results were expected, and others genuinely caught me off guard. Seeing that data and how it changed over time has helped me make more informed, confident decisions about my health. It's not about replacing your doctor, it's about being more informed when you walk into the room. Testing is fast and convenient through 2,000 plus lab locations across the United States. And the wild thing is that if you were to order all of these tests independently, you could easily spend over $10,000. Whereas Function makes it $365 a year, literally $1 a day, for ongoing access to your biomarkers and personalized insights based on your unique results, all tracked securely on the Function platform. This new year, give yourself the gift of clarity, understanding what's actually going on inside your body and making evidence-based lifestyle changes from there. Learn more and join using my link at functionhealth.com/Simon Hill and use the gift code SIMON25 for a $25 credit towards your membership.